Hi, and welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice. My guest today is Dr. Tony Bates from the University of British Columbia. He's an author and a researcher in the area of distance education. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, Leslie.
Good to have you here. Now, it's safe to say that you believe that the marriage of technology and learning is a good thing, yes?
On balance, yes. There's a yin and a yang about technology. And there's always a downside to it, but on balance, yes. The same way that technology really benefits us in most areas.
We can't bury our heads in the sand as teachers, professors. We've got to deal with it.
I think so, yes. Mainly because of the pressures on the system, and there's an alternative way of doing things through technology that can help relieve some of those pressures.
Yes. A couple of definitions first. What exactly is distance education if someone has not come across that term before?
It's anyone studying without the presence of the teacher. Usually it means studying either by correspondence, print-based in the past, but now more and more studying online.
Right, so there are these new options that take
Yep.
people away from the classrooms.
Well, it's not so much they take them away, they're already away from the classroom in most cases. Most distance students, well, there's two kinds of distance students. There are those who are campus students who can't get into classes and want to take courses at a distance because either they work in shifts or they're trying to work their way through university or their classes are just full. And the other kind is the people who've already been through the system once but want to come back and upgrade and have families and jobs and don't want to come back to a campus full time.
Right, so it opens up lots of new options. Another area that you're involved in, and I guess of course the two are related, open learning. What is that?
Well, open learning is somewhat different. Open learning, distance education encompasses open learning, but open learning means that students don't have to have any prior qualifications or to enter a course, and it's open to anybody. Whereas distance education at UBC, students still have to be admitted to UBC. They have to meet pretty high GPAs and so on. So it's not open, it's distance.
Okay. The old school might say something about open learning, wondering, well, you mean you just let anybody in? They don't have to have a high school education? There's a certain kind of loss of elitist quality there. What would you say to that?
Well, it depends. I mean, you best to measure the students when they come out rather than when they go in. The Open University in Britain has had something like 150,000 graduates now. All those students, it's ranked number 10 out of about 110 universities on the government teaching assessment. So the standard of the degree is as high, if not better, than most British universities. But students make their own choice about whether they're ready to study or not.
That's pretty interesting. Now, you worked once at the British Open University.
Yeah, I worked there for 20 years. Yeah.
How open was this Open University?
It was very open. The only qualification was that you had to be 21 years old or over.
And that's it?
Yeah.
Anything else goes?
Yeah.
And then so you prove yourself by the amount of work
Yeah,
that you
and then you have to get through the foundation year before you can go on to second and third and fourth years. So basically there was a sort of selection process at the end of the first year. You had to actually meet the standard to go on to take second and third and fourth year courses.
Are most teachers, professors ready and prepared for the new technology elements that are coming into the classroom and taking education out of the classroom?
No.
In short.
Yeah. The reason they're not ready is not so much they don't know about the technology, although that often applies, but university teachers aren't trained to be teachers. They're trained to be professors. They understand their subject area. They often probably have pretty good deep insights into how to teach their subject. But in terms of pedagogy or instructional design and so on, obviously they're not trained in that area. And that makes it difficult for them then to adapt their teaching to the technology. What often happens is they try to carry over straightforward classroom methods into the new technologies, and that's not appropriate. That's not the best use of the technology usually.
So how do you begin to change them? How do they move down that road toward properly using the technology?
Well, I think there's two ways. One is training, and I'm not sure that's necessarily the best way. The second is to work in a team approach. That is, they work with people who have got those skills, and more we're trying to encourage our faculty to work in multidisciplinary teams of instructional designers and web programmers and so on. I mean, the obvious example is web programming. A good web programmer can get material up, it will look good, the colors will be right, the interaction, the connectivity with other sites, you work all that out, or she'll work all that out much faster than the professor can. And it's not a really good use of a professor's time to learn how to do that. Right. So if you can get them to work together as a team, then that's a good use of the professor's time, and they also learn from that as well.
Okay, suppose I'm a student living somewhere far out in the distance, maybe 100 miles from Sudbury in Ontario, and I want to take a course in anthropology. And I have a computer, and I'm wired up to the internet and all those sort of things, and I find a university that can provide the distance education. When I'm sitting down at my website, what am I looking at, and what can I do with it?
Well, it depends on how the institution has designed it, but if they were taking it from UBC, from our program, the first thing they would have is basically a study guide. The website would be a study guide. It would tell them what to read, where to go, what activities to do, when assignments are due, and so on. We try not to put a lot of text on the website. If they have readings, then either they buy the set books or textbooks, or we'll pre-print the materials and mail it to them, because it's cheaper that way for the student than have to print everything off the screen, which most of them will do if it's a lot of text. So what they'll have is a lot of activities on the web, and they'll have discussion forums with with other students, not in real time, but asynchronous. In other words, they'll log on, they'll see a comment from either their professor or a student. They can comment on that whenever they want, and it will automatically, the software will automatically thread the comment to the previous comment. So when they log on again, they can follow the whole argument through from all the students contributing and the professor. So it's more for activities than it is for giving lots of information to students.
So you still have a kind of interaction between students who are participating at that particular time.
That's the big advance of online learning over the print-based correspondence teaching, is that it allows for interaction between students irrespective of where they are. Yeah. The Open University in Britain tried to, well still does, offers a lot of local study centres. But England's a very populated country. They can probably get 20 students in the same city taking the same course. That's not possible, so easily possible in Canada anyway. So the online interaction is really important for students because it allows them to discuss and ask questions and interact not only with the professor but with other students as well.
Now, if I wanted to take a course that would be pretty obscure in Canada, suppose I wanted to learn something about Australian Aboriginal languages. Through whatever university I'm logged into, can I move on to some other place and take a highly specialized course like that?
Well, that's the difference between open and distance learning. In Canada, it's probably not possible to do that very easily. There are some consortia being built between universities that will allow for credit transfer from one institution to the other automatically, but there's not a lot in place. In British Columbia, we've had that system for over 20 years where students can take courses from UBC if they're at Simon Fraser University, for instance. If they're a distance course, they can take them and count them in for credit. So University of Victoria, UBC and Simon Fraser and the Open Learning Agency have a credit sharing agreement, and they've had that for a long time. Right. It's not so much a technological issue, it's more a policy issue within the institutions.
This is bringing about some big philosophical change in the nature of the university.
To some extent.
A fundamental change, I guess.
Yeah, I think it does to some extent. I mean, for the technology to be used really well requires what I call a cultural change within the institution. And that change has to take place at a number of levels. It has to take place at the level of the professor, most importantly, which means you have to think of different ways of doing what you've always done before, and that's a cultural change. Yes. And certainly the idea of opening up your teaching to other people and being part of a team, and an equal part of a team, not the dominant part of the team, that's a big cultural change for many professors. The second is there's got to be a change in the management to provide the right kind of support for faculty. So yes, it does change. I don't think it changes the core values of a university, but it certainly changes the way that people work within that environment. And there are dangers. I don't think that we should be making every student coming to university spend all their time learning through computers, for instance. You know, I'm a distance educator, so I'm concerned with those students who can't get to campus. But for those students who can get to campus, we have to think very carefully about what kind of experience we want them to have when they're on the campus.
So what about the traditional classroom? I mean, the first little thing I would worry about is, you know, trying to introduce new technology. A professor or teacher doesn't necessarily want to deal with it in a big way. So he has a VCR and an overhead kind of a projector thing. He pops in a videotape and he goes out for a smoke.
Well,
not the way it's supposed to work, right?
Well, it has been known for professors to stick a notice on the lecture door saying, I can't make the lecture today, but the lesson is up on the web. So
yeah.
There's nothing new in that. And,
right.
But I don't think that's the issue at all. I think most professors are very conscientious about their teaching. I think we have to look at what the classroom is being used for, though, and there's a lot of mythology out there. I mean, I guess the ideal university experience is the professor sitting under the tree with half a dozen students on the lawn. Well, where does that happen these days? You know, only in the most elite and highly expensive universities. A lot of our problems are with very large lecture classes and virtually no interaction with students. So the interesting thing for me is not so much the distance side, because that's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned to move online, but how do you deal with that large lecture class? Or if you've got a class of 120 or 200 students, how are you going to deal with that? And one of the things that online learning allows you to do is to change the way you teach, use that classroom experience for not so much for information transmission, but maybe for group work, for students to come back and report on what they've done and discuss what they've studied, but doing a lot of the work online and having a lot of the discussion and interaction online.
Mm-hmm. In the beginning of your book here, you talk about this paradigm shift from the industrial society to the information society. How far along are we on that progression?
About 6 years. I mean, what the interesting thing is how the timescale has been compressed. It took 50 years after the first book was printed by the Gutenberg Press before somebody hit on the idea of putting page numbers on books. And it's only about 6 years since we've had the first web-based courses. So, you know, we're working in a very much more of a time compression. And basically, the technology changes faster than people, and people change faster than institutions. So our institutions haven't really even started to catch up with the impact of this change yet.
And that change continues. I just read the other day about Intel coming out with a new chip that's, I don't know, you know, 700 times faster than the old chip, and then that's going to change the whole nature of information
That's
delivery.
right. And I mean, if you think about that, that's going to allow for speech recognition, make it very easy for computers to understand what people are saying and react. Well, that changes the whole interface. Then you think about that, well, what does that mean for you as a teacher? And so you keep going down all these steps, and the thinking shift that has to take place all the way down that line isn't going to happen very quickly. So I talk in my book about a 10-year cycle of change and minimum, and of course, unfortunately, most presidents aren't there for 10 years, they're only there for 5 years or so. So there's a real problem here about how we handle that long-term change in institutions that are always driven pretty much by the short-term vision and horizon.
So we can't keep our eye just on the technology that we already have, because that's getting old by the minute. We have
it's not the technology that's the issue here, that's the problem. What the technology does, it allows us to do things differently. Then that means we have to choose. It's not that we have to do things differently, but we have a choice here. And that's difficult, because you have to look at the options then and what the advantages and disadvantages are. And it's that kind of discussion that I don't think has really been taking place. There's been a lot of people rushing to put stuff online without thinking why they're doing it. And we need to step back a little bit and think about that. It's not to say we shouldn't do it, and we need to experiment and we need to evaluate what we do. But I think most universities are accepting that this is a paradigm shift, that it is a fundamental change, and that it is impacting every individual. It's very hard to stand in front of a class now of students who spent 10 years on the internet before they come to university and then pretend it doesn't exist.
That's right, and some of us are still trying, I think. My guest today is Dr. Tony Bates, and we're going to take a short break and be back right after this. fact off the page. My guest today is Dr. Tony Bates. We're talking about open learning, distance education, and universities of the future. Can we look far ahead? What is the university of the future? If I say 50 years down the line, just to pick a place, do you have any interesting ideas?
Two comments. One, I won't be here, so I'm not going to worry about that.
Okay.
And secondly, you know, what is it Yogi Bear says? Prediction's very difficult, especially about the future. So, what I think we'll see is greater diversity in our university system. I think we'll have a much wider variety of institutions, ranging from purely commercial, training-based institutions like McDonald University and so on, right through to highly elite institutions, some of which I've no doubt will make an emphasis on being a personal contact, face-to-face, small student numbers, but they'll be very, very expensive, and you'll have everything in between. I think the biggest problems are going to be for the what I would call the medium-sized universities with no particular competitive advantage other than their local home base. They're going to be the ones under the biggest threat, because if you can take a course from anywhere, then you have to have a special reason for going to a particular university. Yes. And it could be the home base, the fact that it's in Nova Scotia or it's in British Columbia, and that might be why you want to go there. But it's not going to be enough on its own, I suspect.
We're in an environment in universities here in Canada right now of fewer dollars, larger classrooms, kind of so-called efficiency, you know, one instructor on salary teaching larger and larger groups. And of course, I can see there are economic advantages that, that would exist for using the technology, although it's very expensive too. So do you get into a little bit of a warfare between where does the money go, toward professors or toward hardware?
I don't think in the short term you're going to save any money through investing in technology in universities. In fact, what you're trying to do really is to improve the quality of teaching rather than to save money. And in fact, that's, if you look at how businesses operate, their investment in technology is really to give them a competitive advantage, to do things better, to have something over the competition, and not necessarily to save costs, although if they can save costs, then that obviously helps, but that's not the main driving force very often. And I think that's the same in the universities, that what we want is students who can come out into the world, into a technology-based world, well prepared, and that means using the technology for their learning.
Right. What is knowledge navigation when you use that term?
Well, knowledge navigation means finding your way around, or the multitude of information that's out there. And basically, you can't learn everything there is in any particular field. We have some proposals now for a 6 or 7 year engineering degree. Well, I think that's nonsense. What you want to do is to train engineers how to continue to learn all their lives, rather than trying to cram everything in a 6 year period, when in 4 or 5 years later, you know, things will have changed anyway. So knowledge navigation is helping you find your way around what information is relevant, what's reliable, what kind of sources can you trust and what can't you trust, and where do you find this information.
Yeah, that's pretty important stuff, because we are pretty well overwhelmed by the volume of information that's out there. University professors are up against new problems that arise in the area of plagiarism as the result of the internet, and this is kind of, you know, to the side of your main thrust here. But you know, what are some of your thoughts about that? Somebody can go to the internet, download an entire essay, or pick bits and pieces off of different websites and change the font and make it appear like their own work. Yeah. How do people deal with that?
Well, a number of things here. First of all, that's always happened. It's not been unknown for other professors to quote other professors' work and not acknowledge it. So that's always been a problem. Yes. Basically, the technology is just a multiplier effect. It just makes it more widespread and easier to do. Another aspect is that students have often done that anyway. They've gone and taken chunks of a book and written it up as if it was their own. And the technology doesn't make any difference to that. It's certainly easy to do, but the principle hasn't changed at all. And a good professor can usually tell when that's happened, because you see a sudden change in the student's style, or suddenly the work is way above what they've done previously, and so on. The third thing is that, in fact, one of the things we want to do these days is to encourage students to work collaboratively. So, in fact, you have to be a little bit careful about saying this is a bad thing. If you say there are multiple sources of information, then yes, you're going to choose and pick between those pieces of information. And so long as you're honest about doing that and acknowledge where you've got it from and quote properly and reference properly, then I don't see any problem with doing that. It's when students try to take things as their own work and hide
Yes.
that it becomes a problem.
So it remains an ethical issue.
Yeah.
Is there an example of a university that's out there that's truly on the cutting edge of the distance learning, making good use of the technology and the internet?
I think my answer generally would be no, because we're all just struggling to learn how to use this. It's, as I said, think of it as something that's 6 years old. You know, that's all we are in terms of the new technologies anyway. There are one or two universities that I could mention in the States that I think have made a big step forward. The University of Central Florida, for instance, has basically all its teaching has a web component. And so it goes from fully distance to fully face-to-face, but most of the teaching is a mixed mode with, say, 1/3 of the normal face-to-face classes and the rest done online. And they've really put in a very good system to support that. And interestingly, they found that the mixed mode students do better than either the purely face-to-face ones or the purely distance ones.
Are we going to reach some next phase where we just plug straight into the head, the modem behind the ear kind of thing?
No, I don't think so. A lot of learning is social. And although you can do some of the social things online, you can't just plug information into your head. And basically, learning is about making sense or meaning of it to you as an individual. And everybody has a different background and a different way of looking at the world. So that means you've really got to test your ideas out on other people and talk to other people, talk to your professors and students and say, is this really how it applies to, is this what it means? And that's a social activity, basically.
Yeah, very necessary stuff. Now, how do you treat the older learner, someone who is reluctant to deal with the new technology and finds it alienating? That must be a very specific case.
I don't think it's just the older learner. I think everybody differs in the way they like to learn. And again, what we want to provide students with is choice, if possible, that if they don't like being in an online environment or in a computer environment all the time, there should be an alternative for them. I think in some ways that everybody should have some experience of learning online because they're going to need that in the future when they leave university and so on. But also I think there should be choices, particularly for students coming out of high school, going into university, to have the choice of face-to-face or online learning or a mix of both.
So the University of the Future is very much about opening up to many different options for the student.
That's right, because students learn in different ways.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take one final short break here, and I'll be back with Dr. Tony Bates right after this. You've been watching Off the Page. My guest today is Dr. Tony Bates. How's Canada doing compared to other countries with distance education and use of the technology?
Well, Canada's always been pretty strong on distance education, so it's had a long history of doing that. And it's not doing badly. If you look around the world, I've just come back from Europe, and I'm still surprised at how slow they've been in getting off the ground. They're where most Canadian universities were 3 or 4 years ago. That may not sound very much, but in this field, that's quite a long lead time. And also, I think there's a lot of people rushing in. It's like the dot-com business. People have rushed in, particularly in the States, and really don't know what they're getting into. And I think Canada is always a little bit more cautious and steady about what it's done. And I think that's put us in fairly good stead. There are quite a few universities across Canada now carefully looking at this and wanting to know which way to work and being a bit cautious about it, but that's right, we should be cautious about it.
The good old Canadian way. Paraphrase the subtitle in one of your chapters there, which I think you've borrowed from Star Trek. Is resistance futile, as 7 of 9 would say?
Yeah, I think resistance is futile. Questioning isn't. I think we should be asking what we're doing, but I think it's futile to pretend that the world hasn't changed.
Yes. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing this with us. My guest today has been Dr. Tony Bates, and thanks for watching Off the Page. See you again next time.